And right, it doesn't matter at what age you wake up, as long as you do wake up. And we have our next speaker. I think he's been awake for quite a while, but maybe not gone out and talked about it. Some of you who've been part of these hearings and these other gatherings will recognize Ian Underwood. Ian, like most of us here, is just kind of a normal person. We've lived our lives, we've raised our families, we've worked, we've paid our bills, we've been part of society. And we listen and we watch as the encroachment continues. And at some point, like Jane said, you wake up and you decide to take that step into the fray. And in so many ways, Ian has stepped into the fray bare-knuckled and taken on not only the whole concept of our own rights, but how our state treats them. So please would you welcome Ian Underwood.
Thanks, Susan. Thanks for inviting me. I don't think of myself as a rabble-rouser so much as an explainer, and I'd like to explain something I've been thinking about today. We're gathered here again to protest the encroachment of our liberties by an overreaching government. This week, it's in support of Connecticut, and it's great that a lot of people have made it down there. But we could do this every week. There's no shortage of bad laws enacted by legislatures and upheld by courts and enforced by the police. So the first law of holes is if you find yourself in a hole, stop digging. Don't change shovels or diggers or schedules. Just stop. But in order to stop digging the hole we're in, we have to first understand what are we doing that keeps making it deeper. And here's what I think. In the American system of government, there are three principal mechanisms for curbing overreach by government. And those are the ballot box, the jury box, and the cartridge box. And all of them work in the same basic way. You threaten that overreach will not be tolerated, and if that doesn't work, you take appropriate action. In the case of the ballot box, the threat is, if you pass bad laws, we'll vote you out. And the action is you vote them out. But the threat is idle, because the action doesn't provide relief. We just keep switching between the same two alternatives, which are increasingly difficult to tell apart. That is, we throw out Tweedledum, and we replace them with Tweedledee. But the election laws are written by the Tweedle parties to preserve the two Tweedle system. And so when it's time to throw Tweedledee out, the only realistic alternative is to bring back Tweedledum. Anything else, you're warned, is wasting your vote. So nothing really changes. In the case of the jury box, the threat is, if you pass bad laws, juries won't enforce them. But again, the threat is idle because the action is almost never taken. You can't get jurors to nullify bad laws if they don't know that they have that power, and if you aren't allowed to tell them. And none of that really matters if government can excuse potential jurors who disagree with the law. In the case of the cartridge box, the threat is if you try to enforce bad laws, we won't let you. The action is armed resistance. And here again, the threat is usually perceived as idle because the action is so rarely taken. And with good reason. They have the SWAT teams. They have the armored vehicles. They have the body armor. They have the flashbangs. They have the state-of-the-art training facilities. They are the ones who look forward to confrontation because it's exciting and lets them feel like action heroes. To quote an officer from Branford, Connecticut recently, I would give my left nut to bang down your door and come for your gun. They are the ones who have to use all that equipment and buy new equipment or face budget cuts. About the only thing they don't have is the money to pay for all that, and for that they need us. So, we have these three mechanisms, and none of them are working. Why? I think it's because we've been ignoring a very basic principle. You cannot fix a broken system from inside that system. And you all know this from experience. It's why you have to make startup disks for your computers. To be effective, ballots must be cast only by people who are not part of government. And by not part of, I mean not receiving salary or pension or benefits, not operating monopolies, not taking grants or guaranteed loans, not sending their kids to government-funded schools, and not otherwise being bribed by government to keep voting for its continued expansion. To be effective, the electoral process must, to the maximum extent possible, be out of the hands of government. That is, government must have no say over who can appear on a ballot, or how a campaign can be financed, or what can be said during a campaign, and so on. To be effective, juries have to be randomly selected so that they represent the beliefs of the whole community, and not just that part of the community that supports the law being tried. Otherwise, the rights of minorities are placed at the mercy of majorities, and even the rights of majorities are placed at the mercy of the highest corporate bidders. To be effective, juries have to be informed that they have the power to judge the law as well as the facts, and that they do not have to follow the instructions of the court if those conflict with their individual consciences. To be effective, the cartridge box has to be in the hands of the people and not in the hands of the government. But over time, each of these mechanisms has been brought step by step under the control of government. So now the great irony is the ballot box, the jury box, and the cartridge box have become tools for overreach by government rather than checks against it. Which is to say, the concept of limited government has been turned on its head by reversing the direction in which the limiting mechanisms operate. The ballot box is now used as a means of holding on to power rather than taking it away. The jury box is now used to enforce bad laws rather than to nullify them. The cartridge box is now used by government to intimidate citizens when it should be the other way around. In a nutshell, checks that were supposed to work against oppressive government from the outside have become supports that prop it up from the inside. So that's the problem. Is there a solution? Well, revolution's always an option, but that should be a last resort. Is there something we can do short of that? If the problem is that these mechanisms have been moved under control of government, then the solution would seem to be that we need to move them back out from under control of government. So what would that look like? Well, it would require eliminating most election laws and requiring beneficiaries of government largesse to recuse themselves from voting in exactly the same way that a trial judge has to recuse himself from a case in which he has a financial interest. It would require eliminating the jury selection process, voir dire, which is French for jury tampering, and requiring jurors to be informed of their rights in exactly the same way the defendants must be informed of their rights. It would require demilitarizing the police, rather than disarming the citizens whose rights the police are supposed to be protecting. Of course, the police would still be entitled to carry personal weapons at personal expense, just like everybody else. So that's what it would take. But all those seem pretty unlikely, I think. There's knowing what to do, and there's doing it. And as Jefferson noted, mankind are more disposed to suffer while evils are sufferable than to right themselves by abolishing the forms to which they're accustomed. Like the proverbial frogs in hot water, we've grown accustomed to a lot of overreach. So probably, we'll just keep digging this hole until the evils that are now sufferable become insufferable, and then we'll have to fight and hope for the best while we prepare for the worst. That being the case, whatever else you do, hold on to your guns and keep your powder dry. Thank you.
Croc TV.